Okay, so balloon, rub it on your head. I didn't actually test to see if this would work or how bad it would make my hair look, but this is more likely to work. Yeah. Well, you know the experiment, right? Where if I had generated enough, well, let me not spoil it. Typically, with enough friction and stuff, you might be able to get this to sit on a wall. And who remembers enough of their high school science to explain how this works?
Static electricity, but
Yeah?
Well, you have the wall is positive and then balloon is negative.
Yeah, so we're transferring charges around such that there's extra of one charge or the other, and I forget which is which, on the balloon, and then that attracts the opposite charge on the wall, and when you get those opposite charges kind of near each other, there's actually an attraction there that holds it on there. So, welcome, Doug. We're having a science fair day this morning.
Nice.
Okay, so that is the scientific explanation for what's going on, but can anyone explain to me via science why there are repeatable, orderly systems in the world, like the idea that opposite charges attract? Can anyone explain that via science? Why there's consistency and order in the world?
Because it has to be.
Oh, that doesn't sound like a scientific explanation, Doug. Can you give me the formula for that? All right, I think you're starting to get my point. Okay, how about this one? So, candle, lighter. Let's see how Todd likes this. Okay, so when I put this lid on it, we all know what happens, right? The candle goes out. So science, can anyone explain via science why the candle stopped burning?
The oxygen was used up.
Yeah, and why is that matter?
Because for to have a fire, you need oxygen as well as carbon or whatever.
Yeah. So there's a chemical reaction that's happening in here, and when we consume all of the oxygen, there's no more oxygen left to be part of that reaction. So, okay, so we can explain how this works via science, but can you explain to me through science why there is just the right amount of oxygen in the world to enable this to happen? Why there's why is the right amount of oxygen? Why is there even life in the first place? Can you explain to me through science why there's the right amount of oxygen?
Well, I think God created it that way.
Oh, that doesn't sound very scientific of it. Right.
Right.
I think you're seeing where I'm going. Okay.
But also in Revelation it says there's just no sea. And the ocean produces most of the oxygen, actually.
That's true. That is very true. All the plankton and stuff.
And
Yep.
so I think we will, in heaven, we won't be as dependent upon oxygen as
Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that. That'd be interesting. Yeah.
so we might be nuclear powered.
Okay, so this is bread, and so looking more at the biological side of things, if I were to make, this is obviously store-bought, but at some factory somewhere it had to be originally created, and so, you mix together some ingredients and it becomes kind of puffy, a little, it's not hard as a rock. So does anybody remember what causes bread to have the little bit of puffiness to it?
yeast.
Yeast, yeah, and what is it about the yeast that's making it puffy?
It's living.
It's living, and so it's like doing what living things do. It's breathing, right? It's giving off some sort of gas, and the gas is what makes the little pockets inside of the bread, and that's what gives it its spongy texture. So again, science can explain how bread rises, but can science explain why, if I did not bake this loaf of bread, but if I did bake a loaf of bread or bake some cookies or whatever for my wife, she would feel, oh, I'm loved, right? Can science explain why yeast doing its thing indirectly causes my wife to feel loved? No. I mean, you see where I'm going, of course. What about, so we have a knife, and this one's a little bit harder. It's not necessarily your typical science, high school science class, but a knife is really helpful for being able to cut. Now I did pre-cut this one, but just pretend, right? Cutting through bread, cutting through a piece of paper, what have you. And this has to do with concentrating the force that I'm applying to it in a very narrow area, right? So I'm exceeding the the capacity of the bread to resist that force. Okay, that's the science thing. But can you explain to me through science why using a knife for purposes of cutting bread is good, but why using a knife for the purposes of, not to be gross, but cutting human flesh is morally evil? Right? Science doesn't explain that. So we kind of hit on this topic earlier about science has a limited scope. It has a domain of what it is here to explain, and it has other domains that it is not qualified to explain. So watch this first video, which kind of makes this point and gives us, oh no, I'm sorry. First, so again, science is this is one of the definitions on dictionary.com, I think. A systematic knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. So we're talking about physical and material. We're not talking about the moral world. We're not talking about the spiritual world. We're not talking about the emotional world that we live in. So science has a domain. Just as a reminder, there is this website. I'm posting the slides and the recordings if you're ever not able to be here, www.tcbc.cc/reasonablefaith. Okay, so today's arc is kind of like three main segments of the point that we'll be covering today. The first is that, as we were just talking about, science has a limited scope. It's not intended to be able to explain everything. And because of that, because there is a scope for science and there is a scope for faith, the question is, are those two scopes incompatible? And the answer is no, they're not incompatible. In fact, they have a number of historical interconnections, and we'll explore those interconnections a little bit. And then finally, not only are they not incompatible, they are compatible, they actually overlap enough that science helps reveal the glory of God. Okay. So let's take a look at the first video. This one does not have captions. It's only captions available in Dutch or something. So I don't know if that helps anybody. So I'm going to skip the captions on this one, but we'll watch the first few minutes of this video.
Hasn't science disproved Christianity? We used to live in the dark ages where we believed in unicorns, fairy godmothers, and goblins. But then science came along and it rescued us from superstition and our age of darkness. And so if we want to believe in a God, aren't we going back to the dark ages where we also believe in unicorns and leprechauns and fairy godmothers? Hasn't science disproved Christianity? And science has given us so many good things, from microwave ovens to mobile phones. So you can't have it both ways. If you want to enjoy the microwave oven, you can't also believe in God at the same time. Well, to answer this, I say this: I am of the science. And it's amazing how many scientists also believe in a supernatural personal God. So there's nothing incompatible about science and believing in God. It's actually the way we understand science that's the problem. There are many things we believe and we know to be true that don't come to us from science. We all believe that it's good to give to those who are less fortunate than us. We all believe that it's wrong for us to discriminate against marginalised people groups. We all believe it's wrong for a powerful person to commit violence upon a weaker person. We all know these things to be true, but how do we know them to be true? Science can't prove any of those things to us, and yet we know and believe them to be true. In other words, there's so much in this life that we believe and know to be true, they don't come to us from science.
Okay, so he's making that same point, and it's really trying to combat what we might sometimes hear, like at the university or otherwise, of you believe you're a scientist, you have to believe in science, you can't believe in God because science explains everything, and so why do you need a God, right? So that's the point that's trying to be made here through this lesson and the previous examples. So let's ask this together. What truths do we know that science cannot measure? I gave you some examples already, but can you think of anything else that we know is true, but we don't know it because of science, we know it for some other reason?
I would just say creation. you can't, science does not really prove or disprove creation.
Hmm. You can observe it, right? Either
Yeah.
way. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep. And are you talking about like the original act of creation or creation as we see it now, or both?
both.
Okay. Hmm.
I was thinking more historic.
Okay. Yep. Yep. Yeah, we don't have a way of directly observing the original moments of creation today through our scientific instruments. We come up with theories, and we have some fringe data, which we won't get into, but that kind of help us see what the earliest moments of the universe were like, but not point zero. Right? We don't have any way of observing that directly with science. We can only conjecture through science, and we can also turn to other knowledge that we get through scriptures.
There's, I don't know if they qualify as truths, but presuppositions that everyone has. That so science, you're talking about came in on the balloon experiment,
Sure.
and just a presupposition of science is that these things are repeatable, that there's an orderliness to the universe.
Right.
But science is based on that.
Exactly.
But there's no way to prove that.
That's right. Yeah, one of the things that is said about science is science never proves anything, it only disproves things that aren't true, right? So we're just sitting here waiting until someday we discover that F no longer equals MA or one of the other formulas, in which case then we have to revise our understanding of the world. So science is really about disproving things that are false. It doesn't actually prove anything is true. So yeah, in that case, then there's a lot about the world that we know through other means besides science, because it doesn't actually tell us anything truthful for sure. This brings us to Hebrews 11:3. By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was not made out of things that are visible. So this kind of speaks to that interrelationship between the physical world that can be described by science and the non-physical world that, in this case, we're talking about God's act of creation. So there is an interaction there, but to the point that was being made earlier, it's, and also the point that we made in the first week of class, you have to be outside of space and time if you're going to create space and time. You can't be limited by making something out of the things you have on hand, because otherwise then you're going to ask, well, how did you get the things that you have on hand, right? Okay, so the Bible refers to how the natural world cannot be explained solely by material causes or by matter and so forth. So we see that the Bible speaks to this duality of the world. We've had these thought experiments this morning that speaks to, there is this scope of explanation that science has, and then there are these other fields of study that explain other things. So there's more to the world than science, is what it comes down to. To the disappointment of all of us who studied science, there's more to the world than science. Okay, so now let's we'll kind of expand on one of the comments that were made in the first video about how science and faith are not incompatible.
Can you believe in God and science at the same time? So-called new atheists like Richard Dawkins and scientific materialists like Neil deGrasse Tyson certainly don't think so. To them, religion gets in the way of science. In their view, more science leads to less God. This is not a new position. It was first expressed over 100 years ago by English physician John Draper in a book titled History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science. Draper, who was deeply influenced by Darwin's then new theory of evolution, regarded organized religion as a direct and existential threat to the advancement of science. As he put it, religion and science are absolutely incompatible. They cannot exist together. Mankind must make its choice. It cannot have both. So are science and religion inevitably in conflict? Have they always been? Well, not exactly. In fact, the giants who established modern science, astronomer Johannes Kepler, chemist Robert Boyle, physicist Sir Isaac Newton, and others, were deeply religious men. They didn't see any conflict between science and religion. On the contrary, they thought that by doing science, they were discovering God's design and revealing it to mankind. Indeed, it's no exaggeration to say that the Judeo-Christian religious tradition led directly to modern science. To back up this claim, Cambridge University historian of science, Joseph Needham, posed a famous why there, why then question. Why there in Europe? Why then in the 16th and 17th centuries? Why didn't modern science start somewhere else before then? After all, the Egyptians erected pyramids. The Chinese invented the compass, block printing, and gunpowder. Romans built marvelous roads and aqueducts. The Greeks had great philosophers. Yet none of these cultures developed the systematic methods for investigating nature that arose in Western Europe during the 16th and 17th centuries. This realization led Needham and other historians of science, such as Ian Barber and Herbert Butterfield, to look for some other X factor to explain why the scientific revolution occurred where and when it did. Here's the conclusion they reached. Only the Judeo-Christian West had the necessary intellectual presuppositions to enable the rise of science. So what were those presuppositions? We can identify three. All find their origin in the Judeo-Christian idea of a creator God who fashioned an ordered universe. First, the founders of modern science assumed the intelligibility of nature, that nature had been designed by the mind of a rational God, the same God who made the rational minds of human beings. Thus, these men assumed that if they used their minds to carefully study nature, they could understand the order and design that God had placed in the world. Second, they assumed an underlying order in nature. This was best expressed by the philosopher Alfred North Whitehead, who argued there can be no living science unless there is a widespread instinctive conviction in the order of nature, a conviction he attributed to belief in the rationality of God. This idea led to the unprecedented use of mathematics to describe the orderly processes at work in the world. And it inspired the invention of better instruments, such as telescopes and microscopes, to see that order. And third, these founders of modern science presupposed the contingency of nature. This simply means that God had many choices about how to make an orderly world. Just as there are many ways to design a clock, there were many ways that God could have designed the universe. To discover how he did, scientists could not merely deduce the order of nature by assuming what seemed most logical to them, that is, merely using reason alone to draw conclusions, as the Greek philosophers had tried to do. For example, the Greeks thought that since the most perfect form of motion was a circle, they assumed that the planets must have circular orbits, something that Kepler later refuted by careful observation. Indeed, because of their theological convictions, the new scientists realized that they would have to observe, test, and measure in order to understand God's design. To these men, nature was like a book, a form of divine communication, intelligible to human investigation. For this reason, they also developed the concept of the laws of nature, implying God's governance over the natural order. Science was a way to decipher that order. The idea that science and religion are in conflict is a popular belief today. But the history of science shows otherwise. All of us, laymen and scientists alike, owe a great debt to the Judeo-Christian tradition. Without that tradition, we'd be living in a much more primitive world, morally and scientifically.
Okay, so there was a lot packed into that video, right? We'll just start with what stood out. What kind of comments? I mean, we actually had already made some of the comments in this class that were showing up here about like the presuppositions that scientists have. But what else jumped out at you?
His history part, he kind of neglected Islamic contributions.
For sure. Yep.
And I'm wondering, because they also are theistic
Mm-hmm.
and monotheistic, and believe,
Yeah.
I'm wondering to what degree they may have jump-started science. I know that.
Yeah, I think
know
so.
that a lot of the things that have been philosophy and things like that have been developed before,
Mhm.
kind of, totally missed in Europe during the Dark Ages.
Mhm.
Came into Europe via the
Yeah.
Muslim cultures,
Yeah.
Arab culture in particular.
mhm.
And so I'm wondering, I know, medical advances, algebra.
Yeah, yeah,
Things like that.
agreed.
So it's kind of interesting, kind of skip or miss them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a little bit of a bias in this, given the organization that he's representing. But I do think that his fundamental point about theism,
Yes.
monotheistic
Right.
God
Yeah.
being
Right.
what
That
God,
would be the common theme.
the common
for
theme
Muslims,
across
too.
all
Yeah.
of those, right?
Yeah.
Agreed.
And I don't know to what degree you would say they had science with the
Sure.
systematic that he talked about,
Yeah.
developed in Europe.
Yeah.
But I know there were a lot of things, so as he talked about the previous advanced cultures, that's the Arabs.
Years ago when I was working at the university, there was this professor, I can't remember his name. Anyways, he told me that a lot of the scientists, they have the word evolutionary anomaly. And evolutionary anomaly is like your belly button. It doesn't have any purpose, but it did have a purpose back when you were in your mother's womb, of course. And his comment was, he was doing research on the cell, and if there's something in the cell that we couldn't understand, a lot of scientists would say, well, that's an evolutionary anomaly. Okay, so just dismiss it.
Just dismiss it as, and put a label on it,
Label
and
it.
put it in a box.
Exactly.
Right.
And his comment was, no, as scientists, we need to figure, it has a purpose. Our job is to figure out what the purpose is. And because of that, he was actually trying to figure out what kind of drugs or medicines or whatever can enter the cell. In other words, to either destroy the cell if it's cancerous or not destroy it if it's not cancerous, things like that. So that's, the idea is that I found it interesting is that, science is really there to find out how things work, how things were made, things like that.
Yeah, that's what I appreciate in here about how like those Christians in the Europe at that time saw the order and wanted to be able to explain, not explain it for their own, we're going to understand the world and there's no need for God. It was actually the reverse, right? It's like we presume that God created all these things and that he has created order, and by understanding the order, we better understand God. So that was one of the takeaways for me from that video, was just like science is about like reading God's textbook. Now, not to say that we have to read the Bible literally in all cases, and we actually learn science from the Bible. That we'll make that point more next week. But yeah, it's we can learn so much about God by learning about nature. Yeah.
Actually, there's a professor at the university in theoretical applied mechanics, David Offner, who attended this church.
Yeah.
And he wrote a book on basically how you use animals or whatever to find, in other words, how do you have a front end loader? How does it work to dig? And, using insects and everything else to figure out.
Oh yeah.
How to make an efficient front end.
Yeah. Biomimicry, I think, might be a title for that. Yeah. Just to kind of drive home this point about science and religion being compatible with one another, 3 real quick studies. First is one from 2007 that found that a survey of top research universities found that about half of the scientists in that institution, the researchers, had a religious affiliation of some sort. But regardless of the religious affiliation, about 75% of them believed that religion contained important truths. So like an acknowledgement, even from the non-religious scientists, that religion has important truths that can be held. Another one showed that most scientists worldwide do not see a conflict between science and faith. So we feel these pressures, we maybe hear these things either through the news or otherwise, but the reality is that scientists don't think that there's a problem. This is a generalization, of course. There's going to be individuals, as we saw in the previous video, but nevertheless. And then lastly, most religious Americans actually do not see a conflict, with the exception of a few hot button issues. We talked about origins of the universe a little bit the first week. We'll certainly talk about evolution and related items a little bit more next week. So we'll get to those hot button items, but generally speaking, most people see this as 2 compatible areas of study. Okay, but what do we do when we encounter one of those hot button issues? One of the concerns that people may have is like, well, now if it turns out that evolution is true, I'm not speaking to whether that is true or not, but if I got convinced by the scientists out there that evolution is true, and if the Bible teaches that evolution is not true, now there's a conflict here and I have to pick one or the other. And if I choose to pick evolution, that means I am abandoning all of my religious beliefs. That's kind of the thought process that goes through folks. But in this book, which I love the title of it, The Late Great Ape Debate by Bayard Taylor, and this is actually a book that's out of print, but Pastor John showed it to me last time I taught the course, and I read it. It was really a good book. Obviously, he talks about evolution, so I'm going to reference his material more next week. But one of the things I wanted to bring forward to this week from Taylor's book is this idea of having a hierarchy of beliefs. So if you think of there being like these concentric circles, we can categorize our beliefs in different rings of these circles, in different rings of this diagram. In the very center are the white-hot core beliefs. These are the beliefs in our scientific and religious fields that we are central to who we are, central to our understanding of the universe, central to our understanding of existence. In the area of religion, we would think of the Trinity. If somehow we were to be proven, if it were to be proven that the Trinity did not exist, that would fundamentally change our view of Christianity, our adoption of Christianity, right? So to think, what are those white-hot core issues that we have to have no matter what, otherwise it is going to disrupt our belief system. Then outside of that, Taylor argues are church traditions, which are interpretations of the core, but not the core itself. These are found in differences between like Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Protestant, different denominations and so forth. So an example here is baptism by immersion versus sprinkling, believer's baptism, infant baptism. Those are, we can have differences of opinion, and we may have very strongly held differences of opinion. But if we were to be proven that one is right or the other, we would probably get on that bandwagon and go with it. Then in the third ring, we have pious opinion. These are less clear, but they still help us think about how we interact with the world. So should the church emphasize holiness as a separation from the world more or less than engagement with the world so as to transform it? So again, we can put certain beliefs in that ring. And if we were to change our beliefs in that ring, then that would be, not quite so bad. Then we get to what's called here private opinion. So it's just kind of more of a speculation. The Bible doesn't really say anything. It has no bearing whatsoever on salvation. So the example quote that he gives, which I think may have been inspired by a movie from the 80s, I think, Do All Dogs Go to Heaven? I don't want to say who cares, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really change our beliefs. And then he also throws out this other ring. It's not even a belief itself, but just to be aware of any of the false teachings that are out there. Those are like anti-truths that we want to be careful of. So again, thinking about where do we put some of our beliefs if we were to like list all of the doctrines of the Christian faith, there are definitely certain doctrines that are very white-hot core. And then there are some doctrines, baptism is an example, there are probably others, that might be just outside of that core. And a little bit of, if we were to change our opinion about that over time, we could probably still have the same fundamental beliefs of Christianity that we do. Any questions or thoughts about those 5 rings? Okay. And I wanted to ask, can you think of a belief that you once held as central? Maybe you just thought very black and white about the world, like this is absolutely true, but later kind of came to a different opinion about, and it hasn't caused you to walk away from Christianity. Have you changed your mind about anything that the Bible teaches us from one interpretation to another interpretation? It's a hard one.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly was a 24-hour day creationist, and have realized that there's more other ways of understanding, faithfully understanding what the Bible says, and have a more open perspective on that.
Yeah, and that's a great example because we'll specifically talk about the different, I think there's 4 or 5 different interpretations that we'll look at next week. And does your previous belief make you more pious than someone else? Does your current belief make you less of a Christian than someone else? I'm going to guess not.
In fact, I hope not.
I hope not anyway, right? Yeah, exactly. So the idea is just to recognize that not everything has to be at that same level of deal-breaking level. Like, it's not necessarily a deal breaker. Some things are, absolutely. And the question is, do things belong in the white hot core versus one of those other rings? Okay, so let's look now. A good thing here to mention, and it's almost an analogous example to what, David, you were saying about, what was it, like abandoned evolution? What was the phrase you used about the belly button?
An evolutionary
Anomaly. Right. So in that situation, one of the reasons not to use the idea of evolution anomaly is to say, if later we were to discover why there is evolutionary reason, well, now we have to give up on that idea of evolution anomaly. And so this is a somewhat similar, it's a slightly analogous idea of God of the gaps. It's when we as believers who have a scientific mindset look at something in the world and we can't explain it through science, we say it must be that way because God made it so. And that could absolutely be true. But the concern there is, if we were to later discover through science an explanation for that thing, suddenly we've actually decreased God's power, if you will. If the only explanation of this thing was God. So, back in the day, I'm sure people did not understand that how the sun worked, or why it's there, or anything like that, or how life. A good one is about how diseases are transmitted, germ theory, right? So if we originally just said, God must have made this person sick, and then later we discover germ theory, we understand the mechanism by which someone gets sick, we'd say, that's not because of God anymore. God must be less powerful. So we have to avoid the God of the gaps theory.
Yeah, when I was a kid, it was very common for people to have their tonsils removed because they had no purpose at all. You know what I'm saying? And so since it was easily infected, let's just yank them out of there. So a lot of people had their tonsils removed.
Okay.
And now we realize that it's part of the immune system.
Mm.
And it has a function and purpose.
Yeah.
And so today, on very rare occasions, will people have their tonsils removed.
Okay, yeah. So just because we lack an understanding of a thing doesn't mean that there isn't an explanation of that thing. Be that, we're trying to replace God with science, or science with God, or the evolutionary piece, or tonsils, or what have you, yeah.
And I think that the real danger of that is, especially when that becomes the apologetic.
Yes.
Science can't explain this, therefore we know there's a God.
Yeah.
Science can't explain that. And now when science can't explain it, okay.
Yeah, we've weakened
We
God's
still think there's a God,
apologetic.
but
That's right.
it's weak.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's look at the last section here about how, now that we know that science and religion are separate domains, but they do intersect, let's look at how their intersection actually can point to a creator God. This is from William Lane Craig, the guy I mentioned last week, who a decent number of videos come from him.
From galaxies and stars, down to atoms and subatomic particles, the very structure of our universe is determined by these numbers. These are the fundamental constants and quantities of the universe. Scientists have come to the shocking realization that each of these numbers has been carefully dialed to an astonishingly precise value, a value that falls within an exceedingly narrow, life-permitting range. If any one of these numbers were altered by even a hair's breadth, no physical, interactive life of any kind could exist anywhere. There'd be no stars, no life, no planets, no chemistry. Consider gravity, for example. The force of gravity is determined by the gravitational constant. If this constant varied by just 1 in 10 to the 60th parts, none of us would exist. To understand how exceedingly narrow this life-permitting range is, imagine a dial divided into 10 to the 60th increments. To get a handle on how many tiny points on the dial this is, compare it to the number of cells in your body, or the number of seconds that have ticked by since time began. If the gravitational constant had been out of tune by just one of these infinitesimally small increments, the universe would either have expanded and thinned out so rapidly that no stars could form and life couldn't exist, or it would have collapsed back on itself with the same result: no stars, no planets, and no life. Or consider the expansion rate of the universe. This is driven by the cosmological constant. A change in its value by a mere 1 part in 10 to the 120th parts would cause the universe to expand too rapidly or too slowly. In either case, the universe would again be life prohibiting. Or another example of fine-tuning. If the mass and energy of the early universe were not evenly distributed to an incomprehensible precision of 1 part in 10 to the 10 to the 123rd, the universe would be hostile to life of any kind. The fact is, our universe permits physical, interactive life only because these, and many other numbers, have been independently and exquisitely balanced on a razor's edge. Wherever physicists look, they see examples of fine-tuning. The remarkable fact is that the values of these numbers seem to have been very finely adjusted to make possible the development of life. If anyone claims not to be surprised by the special features that the universe has, he is hiding his head in the sand. These special features are surprising and unlikely. What is the best explanation for this astounding phenomenon? There are 3 live options. The fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. Which of these options is the most plausible? According to this alternative, the universe must be life-permitting. The precise values of these constants and quantities could not be otherwise. But is this plausible? Is a life-prohibiting universe impossible? Far from it. It's not only possible, it's far more likely than a life-permitting universe. The constants and quantities are not determined by the laws of nature. There's no reason or evidence to suggest that fine-tuning is necessary. How about chance? Did we just get really lucky? No. The probabilities involved are so ridiculously remote as to put the fine-tuning well beyond the reach of chance. So, in an effort to keep this option alive, some have gone beyond empirical science and opted for a more speculative approach, known as the multiverse. They imagine a universe generator that cranks out such a vast number of universes that, odds are, life-permitting universes will eventually pop out. However, there's no scientific evidence for the existence of this multiverse. It cannot be detected, observed, measured, or proved. And the universe generator itself would require an enormous amount of fine-tuning. Furthermore, small patches of order are far more probable than big ones. So the most probable observable universe would be a small one, inhabited by a single, simple observer. But what we actually observe is the very thing that we should least expect: a vast, spectacularly complex, highly ordered universe, inhabited by billions of other observers. So even if the multiverse existed, which is a moot point, it wouldn't do anything to explain the fine-tuning. Given the implausibility of physical necessity or chance, the best explanation for why the universe is fine-tuned for life may very well be it was designed that way. A common-sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super-intellect monkeyed with physics, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. The numbers one calculates from the facts seem to me so overwhelming as to put this conclusion almost beyond question. There is for me powerful evidence that there is something going on behind it all. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers to make the universe. The impression of design is overwhelming. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they reveal knowledge.
So, yeah, I think it's statistically likely that God exists. Quite statistically likely, right? That there is some sort of force. We talked about in the first week what that force was outside of space and time and all powerful and all that, that configured the universe in such a way that life were to exist. Because if any of those 16, I think, cosmological constants was off by even the fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction,
My word.
then none of us would exist. And yet we do exist. Now, the counter argument is, well, let's just imagine there's this machine pumping out an infinite number of universes. I mean, this fraction of a fraction of a fraction is unlikely, but if you have enough other universes out there that have all these different dials turned, one of them, it just so happens conveniently to be the one that we live in, one of them would be this perfectly tuned universe. So that's, again, where the multiverse theory comes into play, but as the video mentioned, there's no way to actually prove that. It's a construct in our mind to try to explain it in a way other than to explain it through God.
One thing I've wondered about is that's life as we know it could not exist in any of these other
Sure.
alternate universes.
Right.
So not that I
Yeah.
go this direction,
Yeah.
but I do have to wonder if I were talking about this with someone, do they raise that, well, life as we know it,
Uh-huh. Right.
What if you turn some of those dials and some other type of
Yeah.
life could exist?
Silicon-based life instead of carbon-based life, right? Or something like that. Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the perfect response to that, but I'm also like,
This is the universe we have and know, and it works.
yeah. I mean, it was like we can observe the fact that this is the particular set of tweaked dials that do exist. Maybe there's another universe out there that's silicon-based instead, but this one is the one that we can observe and prove. Awesome. All right. Well, I think I'm gonna. How long is this one? 3 minutes. Okay, we'll do one more that kind of gets to the same point, the point that goes even further down the line of creation points to God.
This view, simply amazing. I'm Jack Beck. At 12,500 feet in the Colorado wilderness, to remind you that views like this make the invisible God visible. One of the first followers of Jesus, the Apostle Paul, said exactly that in Romans 1:20. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities have been clearly seen from what has been made. In nature, the invisible God becomes visible. Now, to be sure, God intended to introduce himself to the world through the Bible, but not everyone had the Bible. And those without the Bible who only used nature made the mistake of turning nature into their gods. In the ancient pagan world, that's exactly what we see. There were gods of the sun and the moon and the storm and the sea. But that doesn't defeat the reality that in the natural world, in nature, the invisible God becomes visible. I see him in the flowers, and I see him in the magnificent mountain sunsets. I see him in trees that are a century or more older than I am. And I see him in an interconnected ecosystem in which you can't pull on one little thing without tugging on it all. John Muir, the father of our national park idea, made this observation. He said, when you go out into nature, it's like going to church to listen to sermons. He said, there you'll find sermons that are written in the stones and in the animals and in the trees. And if we know how to listen, we're going to see the invisible God being made visible. So, my friend, if you're feeling just a little God empty today, let me first of all encourage you to open a Bible, because in the Bible, God clearly tells us who he is and how he thinks about us. But let me also encourage you to take a walk in nature. Slow your pace. Listen, smell, touch. And you'll find a space in which the invisible God becomes visible. And that's a God who is so anxious for you to know him better.
So we talked about like seeing God in the creation of the universe. Here he talks about seeing God in the creation that we interact with on a daily basis. And I didn't have a video for this, but there are scientists who would look at like individual cells and see God's handiwork in the way in which life is created at the cellular level. So just a thing to reflect on. We won't talk about it here today because of time, but like just to reflect on what is it in creation from the cosmic scale down to the cellular scale or anything in between that encourages your faith. Because as much as God has created this planet and all of its beauties and so forth, he's created all the other stars and planets around those stars and galaxies and so forth. And there's just so much to be awed and inspired by. So, all right. Well, let me pray us out for today. Father God, we do thank you that you are a God who wanted us to discover you, and you gave us so many ways to discover you. Of course, you brought to us Jesus, and you taught us directly, but you also, even before then and since then, have given us the universe. You've given us this world. You've given us all these signs that point to your existence, Lord. And we thank you for the way in which you can just remind us of how much power and awesomeness was required to put all of this together. And we thank you that it's a reminder that your creation, through your creation, you are with us every day and every step of our journey as well. So strengthen us today as we go forth and reflecting on the creation around us at any scale and multiple scales as well. And encourage us the rest of this week. Pray for the rest of our day today as we worship you upstairs and as we go about the rest of our Sabbath. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Thanks all.